Welcome back to my pivot table tutorial part 2. In this part, we are going to look a bit more at how to show details of a given total and also one or two other things as well. But first off, if I were to right click on any value, could be a value, could be a label, it doesn't really matter as long as it's within the pivot table area. If I right click on it, I've got the pivot table options. The same thing, of course, within the pivot tools, we can also access it here. If I click on that, we get exactly the same thing as what we would expect. For the totals, if I did not want to see these totals here, which in some cases may not be necessary or may not be relevant or useful, we can untick this box here for grand totals to remove that for the rows. So if I do that now and then OK, those totals for the rows are gone, but of course the totals for the columns remain. A further thing we can do as well is, if I were to know the details that make up this amount of 12901, I can simply double click on this, and that would generate a new worksheet, create a new worksheet, and then provide me with the details that make up that 12901. So I just double click on that, and we can see here for the budget 12901 there, and of course the actual would add up as well, 13519. So if I go back to the pivot table report, we can see 13519 and 12901. We can do the same thing a different way as well, but right clicking and then show details, and that does exactly the same thing. Of course, it would create a new workbook each time a new worksheet each time we try to show details. So I would go ahead and delete these worksheets since we don't need them. Yes. Okay. At the beginning, we saw that the region was on column A and salesperson on column B. We can present that view by again going into the pivot table options, going into display, and then the classic pivot table layout. I will enable that. This tells you that you can now drag the fields in the grid. So if I do OK, we can now see that the region is in column A and salesperson is in column B. Now for the show details we saw earlier, there would be instances you don't wish people or your users to be able to drill down, to be able to see details, we can actually stop that quite easily by going back into the pivot table options, then going into data, and then unticking the enable show details, then OK. Now if I try to show details on here, it would give me a warning that facility has been turned off. Another thing we can do on here is, at the moment, for the central region, the total here, these two rows are probably too close together. We could insert a row between them, and we do that by placing a cursor within the field we're interested in, right click on it, go to field settings for that field, go to the layout and print, and then we can insert a blank line. We can do the same thing when we're also printing the report here as well. If I do OK, we now have a blank line between those two. We can see here that when I did the field settings, when I click on the field settings for the region, we are not getting the same thing as what we had for the values, simply because this is a different context. These are labels, so we're not going to be getting anything like number formats and things like that. Another thing we can do as well is, let's say for example, these two salespeople, we probably like to group them together. I could highlight both of them, right click on that, and then do a group. And when I group those two, now let's say I want now to do a total for those two. If I right click on here and then do subtotal for salesperson 2, which is the new field that has been put in for me, we can see here that for those two people, this row here, it's added both of these numbers together and treating them as one. What we can do now, and since we don't really need that, but that could be useful in some instances, if I right click on here, I can ungroup, for example, or pardon me, I need to actually go into the salesperson because that's where we grouped from. Right click on it and do ungroup. Bear with me. Right click and ungroup. Right click ungroup. Interesting. Right. Okay. I would now, okay. Let's remove the salesperson 2 because we don't really need it. If I right click in that cell, do remove salesperson 2, we are now back to where we were previously. Other options, very quickly. Printing we've looked at, so we can set print titles and things like that. Data, we've looked at how to disable show details, and of course we can save source data as well. And this one is useful to refresh data when opening the file, especially when you're dealing with dynamic data. For layout, mesh and center cells with labels, this basically would center justify the values, so that central would come into the middle. If you try that, we can see this move back into the middle. I would undo it by going to my keyboard with Ctrl Z to undo that. And most of the stuff with the pivot table is essentially using the right click. For instance, with this we could summarize data whichever way we want, and so there is an awful lot here that we can do with just a right click. A further thing as well, because it's the same data set, instead of doing actuals and budgets, we could choose to report on just actuals or report on just budgets. So let's say we just want to report for actuals for a given year. I could remove the budgets by just dragging it away from the little box, the values box. And because we've taken the budget out, we don't need the actual difference or the achievement. I could take those out as well by dragging them away or right clicking them here and remove, which probably is quicker. Right click and remove that. So now we need to just select year 2009. I could actually move this to the filter area. Before I do that, actually, this here is going to move to here, and I want to move the month as the column to become the column levels. Because I'm using drag and drop, I can easily move that to there and then move the month. That is my cursor, you can see it's changed to a crosshair, so I can now move that, and as I move it, you can see the little blue highlighter is telling me at the moment that it's in the values area, which you can see from this highlighter here. If I move it to the left, it would tell me it's going to go to a row as a row label. If I move it across here, the little blue thing is changed again to just between the data area and the total. So that's where I want it. I'll just drop it in there. Now with this, we've got actuals, which we can see here. It would tell you for year 2009. Of course, if you wanted that for 2010 only, we would get that for year 2010. So that, in summary, is a simple, quick way of going about creating a pivot table report. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.